flatland like a man on the run, riding down Highway 61. Sides of the roads all lined with fields, nothing but sunset in the windshield. Feel it as soon as I ride into town. This is where I go to slow down. Miles and miles of soybeans and corn. I'm in the place where the blues was born. About a mile from the big muddy river, place I'll always remember. Cabin on the lake and a fishing pole. Forever here I'll rest my soul. I can feel my worries drift away from being out in the sun all day. No matter where in the world I go, I'll always find home on the banks of that oxbow.
What's up, guys? Brad Chapel here at Crappie Connection. We're at the Crappie Expo in Birmingham, Alabama. How you guys like it so far?
I love it. A lot of crappie action going on.
Absolutely.
Been good.
Everybody in the crappie fishing world is here for the most part. Definitely, I want you guys to do a little introduction, and I'll kick out what we're going to talk about.
All right, sounds good. My name's Caleb Hensley. I'm from Texas, East Texas to be exact. I run a YouTube channel called 903 Fishing, and it's a Christian-based, family-oriented channel that the whole family can watch.
Yeah.
And most of my channel is actually crappie fishing without live scope, so that's kind of what it's around.
Absolutely.
Joel Harris. I'm from Northeast Mississippi, live in Belmont, and I own a guide service, Joel Harris Fishing, and I do a lot of brush pile fishing, power trolling, and just enjoy what I do.
Absolutely. You know, I thought about these guys, especially Caleb here. You know, I think of not using live scope and going back, and we're going to step back in time to. There's a lot of people not using live scope. There's a lot of people fishing on banks, and I want to really dive into some tips and tricks. And I know Joel's been crappie fishing since he was probably knee-high to a grasshopper.
Yeah, my grandfather started carrying me to Pickwick, and we fished off the bank when I was 4 years old.
I started fishing off the bank. Everybody pretty much started off fishing off the bank and trying to catch crappie. So definitely want to dive into this, and this is going to be the winter season. So keep that in mind when we talk about this. What is some of your guys' basic setup to get started crappie fishing on the bank in the wintertime here?
You know, I use, it's pretty simple for me. I use 1/8 ounce jig heads with a curly tail, like a slab curly or something. And I use a small spinning reel, 6.5 foot rod, and I will go down there, take a 5-gallon bucket, a few jigs in my hand, and I'll sit out on that creek bank and just sit there and cast. And I mean, it's inexpensive.
Yeah, easy,
and it's really relaxing just to go back and do the old school thing, what I grew up doing.
I know you've got a ton of videos on this already as well.
Right.
And I want to even dive even more into, I want to hear your setup, but I want to also dive into your thought process as far as finding that a good spot to actually try on the bank, because there's a ton of bank.
Right. Well, my setup is very similar to his. 6.6 one-piece ACC crappie sticks, small spinning reel. Now in Texas, we have a lot of structure in the creek. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people give me flack for this, but I'm still using 10-pound braid with a mono leader. Slip cork and jig, anywhere from a foot to, 4 or 5 foot deep. Just depends. But as far as looking for creeks to fish, the first thing I'm going to do is look for bait in that creek. Now, just because you don't see bait doesn't mean that there's not crappie in it, but if you can visibly see bait in the creek, those shad jumping around, splashing up, then that is a pretty good indicator that there is crappie in there.
And that's kind of, you'll see it, especially if it's slack water, and usually in those creeks you don't have to worry about the wind and different factors that can kind of hide that.
Right.
But you actually even can hear those shad flickering.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I can hear shad flickering.
Right.
So What would you do to find a spot? Just look at a map, or how do you find a starting spot to find places to fish on the bank?
Well, where I grew up and where I grew up fishing on the creek is probably a little different from where he fishes in Texas. We had Bear Creek and Cedar Creek, which runs into the backwaters, you call it, of Pickwick Lake. And they dug a channel to keep the farmland from flooding. Well, they put a lot of crossings over it. Well, those crossings created back swirls,
Eddies,
holes
yeah.
in the bank, eddies.
Nice.
Those fish will build up in them. And, I go down there, like I said, my favorite rod that I use now is like a TCB made by B&M. Lightweight, it's not to horse anything in it, it's for all about the fun to me.
Yeah.
And it's ultralight. I'll just sit down and I'll find me one of them, sit down. Even sometimes there's a tree will fall in the creek and it'll create an eddy behind it where the root system was or something. I'll sit down right there and I'll just cast and real slow. A lot of that was a sandy gravel bottom where they dug it out. So you could actually just bounce that across the bottom of that rock creek just real slow and they'll just, bam, that thump is there. And it's just, that's what works for me there.
Yeah.
Right.
I might be lost if I go down to Texas and fish with him on what he does.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Same here.
So
you're trying to key in on stuff that you can see slack water for the most part.
Yes, because those crappie will hold in there out of that current.
They don't like current.
They don't like
They
current
don't.
per se.
Yeah, I think of that all the time. Even when I'm on a boat, I think of the same concept. I'm looking for a spot that fish can rest and relax
Right.
and feed because it makes their
Current
life easier.
breaks, bring that bait in there, and it's game over.
And I also want to ask, I hear a lot of times on jig selection, on colors and profiles, do you change that and up when it comes to that, or you have a basic set of jig colors that you like to use over in Texas?
From what I've saw, anything shad colored is going to work. Or monkey milk is one of my favorite colors to use.
Oh, yes.
Monkey milk, silver, white monkey milk. That's match
Natural
the hatch,
color,
as
yeah.
they say. That's what's in they're naturally feeding on, so that's what they're going to go after.
One of my favorite colors on the creek systems at home is black and chartreuse,
Black, can't
white
beat it.
and chartreuse,
Yep.
or either I've got a grub that my grandfather, and he's no longer with us.
Yeah.
But probably I had 1,000 of them, and I've still got a lot of them, but they're a lime green with green flake in it, and that's my number one go-to on the creek. A lot of the guys, they'll say, hey, man, why don't you use something natural? I said, well, this is what works for me. It's worked for me. I'm 60 years old, and it's worked for me since I was 4 down here, so it's hard to get away from it.
Right.
One of the advantages I think of bank fishing is when you don't have a lot of time to go fishing.
Right.
You get off early in the afternoon or don't have to go to work, later in the afternoon. You got an hour to burn. What better way than getting back into Mother Nature and spending an hour, having it back of your truck, back of your car, what have you, SUV, ready to go at all times. I always keep poles in my truck. So, if you find that little current break and you've seen it as you're driving down the road and it's public property,
Go for it.
I know that's where you kind of make a bread and butter on some of that
I fish a
kind
lot
of
of
stuff.
creeks that people overlook.
Yeah.
People, they drive over them for years, won't get out and throw a line. And they always ask me, how do you know what creeks to fish? And the first thing I tell them is I have my better luck with creeks off the northern and western sides of the lake, because that's where your current comes in, the crappie go up, and that is where I typically do my best crappie fishing, are in those creeks.
What about like these bridge pilings and stuff? Do you try to focus different things when it comes to these creeks and bridges and such?
Most of the time, when they do build these bridges over the creeks, they dredge those out. They make them deeper, so a lot of the times your better places to catch these crappie in the creeks will be by bridges, because they're deeper holes where they dredged it out. And like you just mentioned, those bridge pillars, it's structure for them. And they're also good current breaks, like we talked about a while ago.
I think one of the things when I think about, it sounds kind of crazy, but I try to think what the fish would be doing and why they're doing it. But you think of the wintertime, those bridge columns generate heat.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, they do.
They
You know,
do.
they generate a
They
little
do.
bit of heat. And it's kind of like, in this expo, it's actually been pretty chilly. And you see a
Right.
lot of people wearing jackets. That's why they're wearing jackets. They're not quite comfortable. They put it on. But I think of why would a crappie be around these bridge pilings would probably be a little bit deeper, eddy breaks, current breaks, and probably a little bit warmer.
Warmer.
Right.
I know for me, and like I said, I grew up doing this as far as get out of school in the afternoons, have some of these creeks that were connected to the reservoirs, and just pull out and go kill an hour, 2 hours, till dark, what have you. But when you throw out your slip bobber, I want you to kind of explain, both of you guys, how do you work that bobber? I know that's some special.
Well, the water in the creeks is typically going to be a little cooler because it is winter. Now, that could make those crappie a little bit more lethargic. They may not want to chase as much.
Right.
Now, I typically start with a, slow pop retrieve. But I have had times where these crappie, I would pop my cork, that jig, and I would sit for about 4 to 5 seconds. Wouldn't move it. Pop it, let it sit. And I don't know if you know the science behind this, but I've always wondered myself, why do these crappie always hit the cork when it's not moving? They always hit it when it's not moving.
You know, that what's crazy about that, and like I said, this is nowhere near a live scope show, but
Right.
most time when you stop live scope, they stop biting. But with a cork, as soon as that bait's, I wonder if it's just that
if it's
fiddling
not moving,
down, or
it's crazy.
I'm like you. I wonder if it's. You think about it. When you pop that cork, that jig runs up in the water.
It's a delay,
when
right.
you stop it, that jig pendulum's down.
Right.
And that's the only thing I can figure out. And I've thought about that. And I'll tell you something else that I really like about fishing current with a cork or with a jig. I'll cast past the current. In other words,
Right.
in an eddy. I'll be on the opposite side of an eddy and
Right.
cast in it. And I'll let that line fall in that water and let that water pull that jig into that edge
Take
of that
it.
current, and you'll feel them pop it. You can do the same thing with a cork.
Right.
And a lot of people, I see them cast, they'll be like, how come you're catching them? I'm not. Well, they cast, and as soon as they cast, they start reeling.
Right.
They're reeling it straight to the swift water, where when you let that water pull that jig down, the edge of it, it's like a bait coming down the creek with the current.
Right.
And I think a lot of times that instigates strikes.
That makes a lot of sense.
yeah, because time you cast it down, it takes, depending on the size of the jig head, a certain amount of time for it to actually
Right.
fall into position.
Especially using like a mono leader. That mono is going to be lighter. It's going to take time to get down there. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you think about what works and what doesn't work, and it goes across every form of fishing, is details. Do you need to cast 10 feet past that current break,
Right.
let it slide back into position? And I always tell people that once you get past where the fish are at, you're fishing, but to actually catch, you got to fish where the fish are.
There you go.
Exactly.
So if your bait's sliding in too late position, you're going to miss that little key spot. And I've noticed, and I've got a lot of fond memories in the beginning of myself crappie fishing, is you'll find these little spots, and literally they're almost the size of this table. And it
Sweet
might be
spots.
these little honey holes, and that's probably where honey hole.
Right. Oh, it's
they're
got
not
to be.
big, and it's just loaded with fish, and it's usually that one little current area that gives them this perfect slack water that they can just sit there, and you'll catch that one fish out of it, but there's always fish wanting that spot that fish
Right.
was in.
Replacing.
Yeah, they just keep filling in, and you're like, man, I caught 40 fish out of a spot this big as this table.
I'm gonna tell a little story,
Yeah.
and it went to the creek with my grandfather. He was a jig fisherman, diehard. He wouldn't buy a minnow for nothing, but he would let me buy some occasionally. Well, one day I said, I'm gonna carry some minnows, Papa, and a cane pole, not a rod and reel. I did. I found me a log. There was current this way, but behind that log, it swirled in behind that log, and he cut out in a red clay bank. I could take that minnow and I could set it down in front of that log right where that swirl, and when it'd float by that log, I'd catch one every time. I stood right there and put all I could put in 2 5-gallon buckets on that creek, And there's another guy with him in, and he was trying to get in, he'd dip it in there, but he wasn't watching what I was doing.
Right.
He didn't catch a third of the fish I caught because I let it be out here in the current, let the water bring it around the end of that log, and it like naturally.
Right.
And he'd just go set it in by the log. And that's something that taught me early on. I was young then. I mean, I was in 15 years old. And sometimes it's like you said, it's about the details, paying attention to the little things that makes a big difference.
And you hear it a lot with the new technology details, but it goes back to old school. And you can just about go to any spillway, or especially when it's a lot of people fishing in an area. And it's actually one of the things I enjoy do if I have some time to burn. I'll go down to a spillway, and there's usually one or two guys that you'll say, that guy always catches them. And he's got something figured out, and he's doing something a little bit different than everybody else, because more than likely he's paid attention to one little fine detail, and there could be 40 other people lined up on that bank, and he's the only guy catching me. Like, what is that guy doing different? Well, what color does he got on that I don't have? I mean,
and you know, it may be not necessarily be the color. It's just that little bit of something, like me floating that minnow around the end of that log versus that guy just setting it beside the log that he may have caught on to, that he's figured out is the reason he's catching those fish. And you know, a lot of times it is color. Don't misunderstand me. Don't anybody take that wrong. A lot of times color's a big difference, but sometimes that little detail is huge difference.
you can't catch them if they're not there.
That's true. That's exactly right.
You know, I love this subject, and I wish I could do it really more, but, you know, guiding full-time and everything else, it's hard to have the time to do it. But I think, you know, if you got some time to spare, throw a rod in the back of your truck and, you know, do like you do. Just pull over and find that little honey holes.
What's your favorite time of year?
Me?
Both of you.
My favorite time of the year is winter.
Yeah.
For crappie, and of course spring. You know,
naturally
hard to beat that spawn bite. You know, this year I really just got into wading, and I mean, you know, catching crappie in 6 inches of water, 2-pound white black crappie. I mean, you could see them right in front of you, and you set that jig, 11-foot pole, set that jig on their head, and they just demolish it.
I
mean, and you got 11-foot pole, but you only have a foot and a half of line out. So you gotta, I mean, it's really an art to it. I didn't know how difficult it was until I really got into it, how many fish I lost with that long pole, foot and a half of line out, and you gotta literally move that pole to you, get that crappie off. It's work.
Yeah.
You know, when I think about these creeks and eddies and different things that can be really beneficial, and I've seen people get turned off because they say, well, we had a lot of rain and it's blowing out the creeks, and that can be good examples, but it also can create these little tiny honey holes to be explosive.
Well, a lot of that water goes into places that it wasn't. And if fish can go, they'll go. That's what a lot of people don't realize is if the water goes up in these woods, the fish are going to go there too. They're going to go.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
They'll go up in them woods. I caught 25 crappie one day in the woods. I mean, I was totally surrounded with trees, almost like I see on TikTok with Grenada. They be in the jungle, they call it. Well, it doesn't really happen that much over in Texas, but we had a massive flood come through. The crappie were in the creeks. Creek banks weren't, flooded yet, but when that water rose up out of the creek banks and went into the woods, those crappie just followed the water.
You know, and on that subject, there's probably something that keyed in that created to get more bites than other spots. And, wading's a whole nother animal as well.
It is.
But, the bank fishing thing is anybody at any age can do this fairly easily and on a budget.
Right.
And, I mean, literally you're talking about a slip bobber, a pocket full of jigs, 3 or 4 colors, 5 colors, whatever, and
a bucket. That's all you need is a bucket.
Even a lawn chair.
There you go.
A lawn chair and a stringer. I mean, within $50, $60, you can go out there and start doing this little deal, especially if you're wanting to see, you don't have the means to get a boat or anything else, but you want to get out there and enjoy the outdoors, or if you have a boat and you don't have the time.
Right.
Look for these little eddies by these bridge pilings and these little magic little honey holes, because they're out there.
They are.
Personally, to me, and Joel asked this question about what would be one of my favorite times to do this. If I would say that, I would say cold winter months whenever we had some kind of current in them. I think of current in creeks and rivers and different things like that. Those eddy breaks like we've talked about, these eddies that create slack water to really position fish in around these bridge pilings and logs, and from man-made structures to God-given structures that's in the creeks and rivers, you can take a big advantage of it and go catch crappie very easily, to say.
Yeah, one of my favorite months to do this is February.
Yes.
Most people want to be
Cold.
hunting,
Yeah.
or in the house by the heater.
Right.
I love February on the creek, and it's productive.
It is.
All right, I want to ask you guys both, and you might have tipped on a little bit. You said the bait colors that you typically use are monkey milk colors,
White, shad colored.
If you hadn't, give me 5 of your favorite color out there.
Five.
Five.
I'm going to go monkey milk. I'm going to go chartreuse, white. I've actually had a lot of success with black and chartreuse, like he mentioned, because, in Texas, we got muddy, dirty water. I mean, it's filthy. But those crappie are in there, so they need to be able to see that jig. A lot of those natural color baits, they don't work where I am. They just don't work because the crappie cannot see it. One more. I'm going to go pink. Pink. Dark pink.
Dark pink. All right. I wouldn't have done pink, but I'm not
Dark
pink.
pink.
Dark
It
pink.
works.
I wouldn't have done dark pink either.
It works.
Hey.
My 5 favorites on the creeks where we live: black and chartreuse, white and chartreuse, lime with green flake, and then my backup when it's rained and muddy is orange and chartreuse.
Okay. Bright.
Right.
Mine's probably number 1's going to be an orange and chartreuse.
Okay.
We have a lot of dingy water. I'm typically fishing in and around our area and throughout Mississippi. It's going to be that orange, chartreuse, black and pink if I had to do a pink shade.
Okay.
Black and chartreuse, it's a great color, but it's almost, I don't know.
That's sort of a given in it.
That's
It's in
black
the-
and chartreuse. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just.
It's a staple in the crappie
Yes,
fishing.
it is.
Monkey milk still has to go in the mix because it just flat out looks like a shad no matter what style it is.
Do y'all have any luck with blue? Dark blue, light green?
I do trolling.
Okay. Blue
but-
is also a good color in the creek. I probably should replace pink with blue, but
Pink and blue.
it's dark. It's dark. I mean, the crappie can see it.
You know, I hadn't thought of that. Maybe I need. You know how much we use blue and pink trolling.
Right.
Maybe I should
Blue
go
and
to the
pink's
creek with the
bad.
blue and pink.
I should replace pink with the blue, dark blue. I mean, it's not black, but in the water, it's just something dark. And when it crosses their face, they can see it in that muddy water.
Right.
It's a color, it's called purple passion. It's a dark purple. It's
Yeah.
almost a black color that would be in that type of lineup for me as far as the creek system, river systems. And I think it probably don't even necessarily look like a shad or a minnow to these fish. I think sometimes it looks like maybe even a little crawfish almost.
There you go.
And I think that's maybe even crosses over with the orange as well. I can recall some tournaments won at Sardis years ago with guys fishing and catching crappie, and their stomachs was full of crawfish. So I think that they eat a lot of crawfish too, especially in a creek getting washed
Right.
through there.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have to, stick to that orange and chartreuse. But, this is a cool deal. I appreciate both of you guys come on, and I definitely check out this guy on YouTube. He makes some great videos.
Appreciate it.
We've talked for a while. Both of these guys, I've known them for a while, and Appreciate both of you guys' time today and sharing a little bit about creek fishing, some old school creek fishing that, hey, still catches fish. Don't
Every
it?
day.
Bank
Yes.
fishing.
Love it.
It doesn't get any better than bank fishing. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel just dedicated to bank crappie fishing because it don't get no better than that.
Yeah. Throw a rod and reel in the back of your truck.
That's right.
Rock on and go catch crappie.
That's right.
All right, guys. Well, I appreciate your time. You got Brad Chappell.
Joel Harris here.
Caleb Hensley.
And Brad, thanks for having us on the Crappie Connection.
We
Yeah.
appreciate it, Brad.
Make sure you guys hit subscribe, turn your notifications on. Until next time, you got Brad Chappell here. Holla.
About a mile from the big muddy river, a place I'll always remember. Cabin on the lake and a fishing pole. Forever here I'll rest my soul. I can feel my worries drift away.